Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where we explore self-empowerment, personal growth, and the journey to becoming our best selves. I'm Dr. A, your host, and in today's episode, we will be talking with Dr. Heather Browne about the power of communication. Dr. Heather has a doctorate in psychology and is a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 27 years of experience. She is also the author of Speaking with the Heart and a TEDx speaker. Dr. Heather helps people recognize the power of communication as one of our most important life skills. Welcome, Dr. Heather. I'm excited to have you here today.
I am honored. I've been looking forward to today. So thank you so much.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for having us. I wanted to start, I don't know if this will surprise you, Dr. Heather. I don't know how much you know about me. My big thing in terms of my platform is this whole notion of as adversity, that adversity does not have to hold us back. And that sometimes adversity, we can let it hold us back, or we can actually use adversity as a springboard into something greater. And I suspect you may have a good story to tell us, because I don't want to give away too much to the listeners. I'd like you to tell your own story, but I am aware of your background a little bit and what you've shared in terms of your own personal challenges. And what I would love to hear, or how we can start today, is to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about how you got to be where you are today in terms of, writing your book, and also landing on this place of recognizing just how powerful communication is in our lives. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, and I'd love to hear your story.
Thank you so much. In a nutshell, my mom was a paranoid schizophrenic. And when I was young, I didn't realize there was anything wrong because she was just my mom. But as I started to get around the age of 8, I started to notice that there were odd things going on out in public, which made me start to question what was going on. There was an episode when I was 12 when helicopters were going over the house, and she thought they were coming to get her. And my dad did what any person would do and said, Ginny, you're crazy. It's all in your head. They're not coming to get you. And I looked at her, and it was not registering at all. So I saw my dad trying to calm her down, not working. My mom in complete panic and fear. And I asked myself, what does she need? She needed a blanket. So I grabbed my blue blanket, threw it over her head. And I said, they're not going to get you, Mommy. They're not going to get you. And when she came out, she looked up at me with eyes that seemed to say, you believe me. Something inside just clicked. My reality and your reality are different. And what we do is we try to force the other person into ours. And we go through life assuming everyone thinks, believes, feels, understands what we also. People say, well, it's common sense. Well, only if you've been told that this is common sense. So inside my head, I realized the bridge to communication is not so much the words. It's the compassion. It's the connection. And when we create that bridge with another, it's then safer to be who you are, because I'm not needing you to be other than you are. And so that created this beautiful experience with my mom of trying to be able to support her when she was here and when she was wherever she was, but to try to keep expressing love and connection with her. And then that, of course, led to me, after she killed herself, being in therapy for many years, trying to explore how do I help myself heal and find out what I truly felt and believed. And then that opened up the door for the psych world. And then the book and the TEDx came out of being in COVID and needing to do everything virtually and feeling like there's so much more that I want to share. Um, there's pivotal moments in my life where I've realized that connection is really the key. Compassion is that bridge. And so that's the premise of all my work. It's why it's called Speaking with the Heart, because if you can bring love, compassion, kindness, respect as much as possible into any situation, it's only going to improve it. Might not take it away, but it'll make it softer to deal with. And we instead, when a baby comes into the world, we're very intuitive. But as soon as they get their words, we say to them, tell me your words, tell me your words. And we focus more so on the word aspect than what is going on energetically. And so a lot of what I do is try to help the people bring it into alignment and also be able to sit with somebody else who's in a very different space and to let that be okay for that moment until you can move further. So adversity to me is what brings inspiration. There's something other than what you have been that you're now going to become. And what do you do with that? So it can be incredibly hard. It's transformational, but then yet it takes you to a very different place because of what you've endured. Yeah. Right. So that's why when you asked would I come, I'm like, oh my goodness, I would be honored to be on your podcast. Yes.
Well, and I love, I mean, I'm just sitting here just taking this all in, Heather, and I loved what you said, because for me, you know, my catchphrase is adversity is the springboard into greatness, right? And you said, you know, adversity can inspire. And that's what I'm learning, you know, in the work that I've done. I've been doing this for 30 years. And even my own life story, if I look at my own life story, as well as, you know, the gift that I've had in witnessing all of my clients' life stories, is that, you know, for many, the adversity is inspiration, and just like for them it is for you. And I'm just struck by, you know, several things that you said. One of those things is it I'm in awe that your 12-year-old self had more wisdom than your father from the perspective of being, I mean, having, like, I'm really curious. I want to go back to this because I think it's really phenomenal, Heather. What was it about your 12-year-old self? Because a lot of times at 12, we're going to go with what our adults are showing us, right? And for some reason, you had a wisdom in you that you were able to see your mom and to see what was going on and to have this recognition. Not only were you and she having a different experience, but to have the compassion. Like you didn't make her wrong. You didn't say she was crazy, you know. And I'm curious, how have you come to understand that?
You were so gracious and kind. And I don't think I knew it was wisdom. You're going to possibly be a little bit less off-filled with me when I share it. But what my dad didn't work. And so he tried first. And I looked at that and I thought, this isn't working. She's really, really scared. She believes what she believes, even though nobody else did. And so my question was, like, I don't know what to do. What does she need? And what she needed was to feel safe. And as a 12-year-old, what do? You bring your blanket. Now, I didn't know if it was going to work. I just knew that she must have felt very, very alone and petrified. And I could try to at least lessen some of that fear. It wasn't until she came out from underneath the blanket that I could tell it had helped. I didn't know how to really get her through I just knew I needed to try to lessen the fear element. For her, that was the helicopters. So if I
Mm-hmm.
could have her focus of they're not going to, and I kept saying, they're not going to get you, you know, they can't see you, whatever I could, as a kid, make believe say to try to find that place where I was not disallowing her belief,
Mm-hmm.
but trying to love her through it. And I think it comes out of just a child's love. I adored her. She in so many ways was such a wonderful, amazing woman. And I wanted to help because it was horrible seeing her in that state, just
Mm-hmm.
petrified.
Mm-hmm. You know, Dr. Heather, what I'm struck about this story that you share is, first of all, let's think about this just on a very superficial level, and that is, people hear your story and you're like, I grew up with a paranoid schizophrenic, and I think the initial response or reaction to that is, oh no, I am so sorry, and people probably create these stories about how awful it was, and yet the story that you're sharing with us today is definitely one of inspiration. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is your 12-year-old self had not gotten away from your intuitive self, and it's interesting because it's around 12 or 13 that it does start to happen. And so, what is amazing about children is that children are so much more connected to their deeper selves, right? To that wisdom. And your wisdom shows through this experience. Like, you saw your mother through the eyes of love, and as children we adore our parents. We don't judge our parents, we don't make our parents wrong, we adore them. And you saw your mom through the eyes of love, and all you wanted to do was to help her, and you gave her your blanket. And yet at the same time, one of the things that came up for me is, I wonder, in your childlike self, and you're just being you, is if you knew that from that deeper place of wisdom, that just being there with her, comforting her, having compassion for her, staying connected to her, was so healing for her and helpful. And at the same time, this became your inspiration for your life's work. Like, this is where the seed was planted. Um, and I'm curious about, once those seeds were planted, like, what did it look like as it sprouted? Like, as you grew, as you evolved, how did these seeds become whatever was next for them in their next iteration? Like, what did that path look like for you?
I think moving into really creative spaces, drama, music, writing, things that open you up to thinking different ways, looking at different ways, exploring things. Obviously, going into the psych field. I worked in a group home with teenage girls for 6 years. So there was quite a need to try to help people who are in a situation that was challenging,
Mm-hmm.
and where love, support, maybe some normalcy a little bit, or stability was going to help.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got blessings from that right and left. I approached master schools and said, I feel I'm to be a psychotherapist. I've been on my own since I'm 17, still have my undergrad debt. Is there any way I could, cook, clean, file, be your security guard? What can I do? And of course, most schools said, no, 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 we don't offer that. And one school said, no one has ever asked me that before. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, I'm asking. And so they gave me scholarship, and the group home where I was working gave me scholarship, and that allowed me to get the master's. So I had things like that. I had the most amazing internship with APC Psych Services in Anaheim Hills. Amazing, incredible supervisors. So I have definitely had the world, the universe, God share with me, like, this is where you are to be, and just keep showing up and doing the work, and keep offering that love, offering that compassion, offering that place of, I will respect you because you can be whoever it is that you choose to be, and I will choose to be whoever I choose to be. We're simply just two humans on this earth. I have no right over you, you have no right over me. And I think all of that just created more and more of that awareness. And that goes to a very deep place of compassion with self and with other. And so that becomes the key for so much of the couples work I do and the grief work I do. How do you keep that bridge with someone who's passed over? How do you keep that bridge? And in what ways can you? How do you do that with your spouse? It's just a really fertile soil for some beautiful new organic upspringings, which I love to help people find.
Right. You
Yeah.
know, it's interesting that you describe, you know, communication as something that's very, you know, very powerful, a very powerful skill, and you do a lot of couples work, and as do I, by the way. So, you know, it's interesting to hear your experience around this because it's, you know, something that I can deeply appreciate with my own experience. And one of the things that I have often said is that relationship is the one of the, and especially intimate relationship is one of the most powerful vehicles for healing and transformation. And sometimes that vehicle, the road can be really rocky, and there can be lots of resistance, and there can be lots of left-hand turns and right-hand turns and going backwards and going forwards. Nonetheless, it doesn't diminish the power of it. And so I wonder, you know, for you, again, the things that are really striking me is, you know, these seeds of inspiration for you happened in relationship, you know, relationship with your mother. And I'm thinking about the 3 C's: compassion, communication, and connection. You know, these are the things that you're talking about. You know, there's something that's going on in my mind that I think a lot of readers may be, listeners may be thinking, and it's a question that I often get, because again, I do come from a background of adversity. You know, I grew up with a childhood abuse and neglect and abandonment. And my big thing coming out of that was, you know, it doesn't matter what happens to you, you still have this power within yourself to be and do and have whatever it is you want. That was my thing. Those were my seeds of inspiration. And oftentimes I have, whether they're clients or just people, they will say to me, well, did you go into psychology because you needed to heal, like you had to find your own answers? And for me, the answer was no, even though it was definitely something that happened. It wasn't intended. It wasn't planned. For me, it was a pure curiosity about human behavior, and then also wanting to help. And that was a great field for me to go into. And I'm curious for you, you had mentioned, you know, losing your mother to suicide, and you did a lot of therapy. And, you know, at what age did you lose your mom? Did you go immediately into therapy? And did your experience with therapy, did it influence your decision to become a therapist yourself?
All of it, yes. So I
All
was
of the
16.
above.
Yes. I was 16, and compassion for all that you went through.
Thank
That's a
you.
lot to go through in your childhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
My mom killed herself when I was 16. So I was a teenager, and there really wasn't that much awareness of mental health. I remember saying to my dad the next day, Dad, I need to get some help. And he just said, she's gone. And I thought, wow. And so I started to connect with a church group, which was very, very, very supportive. And then when I went off to college, freshman year, I had just a crashing point where someone on the dorm hall, her name was Susan. Susan, I apologize profusely if you ever see this. She one day came up to me and she said, what does it feel like to be perfect? And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? And she said, you're beautiful, you're intelligent, everyone likes you. I'd gotten a lead in the play, which you're not supposed to get freshman year. But I remember looking at her and I started shattering. And I just started sobbing, and, you know, mucus was spewing everywhere over this poor girl who had just asked me a question. But what I realized is, what the hell am I presenting to the world? Because I was so fearful, so scared, so lost. I had a quarter in my pocket. I didn't know where I was going to stay for Thanksgiving because the dorm was closed and I had nowhere to go. And it was just complete breaking point for me to realize I am so fake or so hidden that if I don't change this, I'm never going to be loved by another person as deeply as I desperately want to be. And I'm not really allowing people to support me. But I didn't really know who I truly was as a child, because my focus was more so keep mom alive, keep mom calm. Like, let's be. I remember when I'd come home from the bus and I'd get off the bus, and I loved school. It was a beautiful oasis for me. And I would knock on the door because I always wanted to give her warning I was coming in. And I'd open the door and I'd say, Mom, I'm home. And then I would, you probably know this, I would listen to what her voice sounded like and what room she was in to prepare myself for what was ahead. If she was in her bedroom, it was going to be bad. Yeah, that was the worst room. Her bathroom was questionable. If she was out, like in the kitchen or the living room, it was going to be fine. But I went through life like becoming what I needed to be for the situation of how she was. And so I really didn't know myself. And so when I had that crashing moment, I went to the nurse and said, please tell me you have counseling. And she said, well, you do. And I said, I really need to go because I was lost and I was deeply depressed when I realized my life was phony. And it was hard. And I was in therapy and out of therapy many times over the next couple of years as more would come up. And I realized, oh God, there's more that I need to do. And I would go back in. And I still do. When I hit a rough patch now, I'll still go because I think we all can use some support, some guidance, a place to process what we're going through. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Dr. Heather, you and I have some commonalities in our background and in our experience. I know the details are a little different, yet there's a lot of similarities from the perspective of, you know, I felt like I needed to take care of my mother as well. My mother had mental health issues as well, although not as extreme as paranoid schizophrenia. She was chronically depressed and very empty, a very empty soul. And I was the oldest of 3 children, and I became a parentified child. And I was always concerned about her well-being. And I'm sure on a very subconscious level, you know, it was like, okay, I need to take care of you to take care of me. And, you know, I didn't even know who I was because my focus was so much on making sure she was okay and that my brothers were okay. And, you know, I also, you know, had this veneer or this you know, I don't even want to call it a facade because a facade implies that I knew I was doing it. I didn't know I was doing it. What I was showing myself to be on the outside was very different than my internal experience. And, you know, I had a crisis at 29, you know, where it was like, I had achieved everything I wanted to achieve. I looked great on the outside, you know, from all means, I looked very successful. And yet on the inside, I didn't know who I was, or it was just, there was this emptiness. And so a lot of what you shared with me really, you know, I can relate to it. I can understand that. And at the same time, something that comes up for me when you share your story, just as well as I think of my story, and we think about this with our clients, is you never know what someone's struggle is. You never know what their internal battles are. And they may look great on the outside, and they may be struggling on the inside, which really comes back to the beginning of our conversation that I'm just so in awe about, is at a 12-year-old self, you understood compassion, you know, and compassion is the buzzword of the decade, it seems, you know, and you know, I just wanted to make mention of that. And, you know, I recognize we've got to take a quick break. I want to take a really quick break, and I want to keep talking about this. I think this is really powerful, and I'm hoping that, you know, it inspires our listeners. But let's do a real quick break. So you're listening to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest, Dr. Heather. We'll be right back. Thank you. And we're back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest, Dr. Heather. And I'd love to just start where we left off, Dr. Heather. I'd love to hear more about kind of your journey. Like at what point did you know that you wanted to be a therapist? And and how did you evolve and get to the point of writing your book? I'd love to hear more about that.
So I was working in the group home.
Mhm.
And I had my undergrad was theater, because theater was just a beautiful creative escape for me. I was working in the group home and doing really beautiful work with the girls, and I was trying to make it in theater. I was 6'1", and I didn't realize how limiting that was when you got beyond college. In college, I was cast all the time. But into the real world, there aren't many roles for a 6-foot ingenue. So I was doing a little bit of modeling and really trying to make it work. And it wasn't going. And I was frustrated, and I kept trying and trying. And I'm going to say God speaks to me, but whether you want it to be source, whether you want it to be, your inner wisdom, I got a knock on the head. And what came was, instead of trying to be someone who you are not, how about you help people be who they are to become? And it just went, oh, wow. And so that's when I then pursued the master's schools to see about getting into the program. I'd already worked in the group home, I think, for about 3.5 years at that time. And I knew I wished I could be a therapist there, but I didn't have the training. So I was a counselor. And I really enjoyed it. But I thought, oh, I could offer so much more. And so then I went into the psych program. And then when I got my doctorate and my licensure, I, at that point, was married and then had my practice. Started with teens, which makes sense because that's what so much of my internship had been. But as I just kept growing and becoming old, saying to me, why is it that you don't have a book? I thought, well, I'll get to it someday. I'll get to it someday. And then, as I said, in COVID, there was this space to be able to do beyond what I had done. My husband had passed by that point. My kids were, for the most part, grown. And so I decided to do both. And then that's what I did. And it was that same message that if you give yourself the opportunity to start with compassion and let that be what connects you, what is it that you need? Where is it that we're trying to go? What are you fearful of with me? What's going to cause you to pull back? How do we create this connection that we keep like a rope bridge, walking on tenderly and carefully, so we can eventually get to the other side? And when you go through those agreements, when you go through that clarity to make it safer for both of you, then you can step in. And I've just learned a lot from working with so many couples. I started to see what tended to work all the time. I started to see what only worked some of the time. One of the biggest things that I have found is that we don't daily, I feel, do something that can really be beneficial in our relationships. And from that, then what happens is assumptions, which is problematic. Because as soon as I believe you have some sort of negative view of me, now I'm viewing you adversarial, and I'm going to pull back. And I'm going to start to be questionable of everything that you say, if that's my belief, but it might not be true. So I came up with an exercise, and it's one of the best ones I've ever shared with my clients effectively, which is before bedtime, a couple hours before. It can be with your child, it can be with a friend, it can be with your boss, but at some point each day, ask, is there some place I didn't come through for you? Is there something that I've missed? Is there something that you're not sharing with me that you know is important? Now you have to be open to what they'll say and not in a defensive state. Because if you say to me, I think you were really rude today, if I come back with, well, no, I wasn't, or you were rude with me, then I haven't done any help. But if I truly want to help our relationship, you can then have a really beautiful conversation. And a lot of times it's, oh my gosh, I forgot, or I didn't know this was so important to you. What I have found with working with couples for so long is that so much of where we get offended, angry, hurt, defensive is not in the person intentionally wanting that. I remember, and then the other thing I ask is, where have you felt the most loved, or where have you felt the most respected? Where did you feel the most heard or seen? And could we take that a little bit deeper right now? So it does two really important things. It cleans up the dirt, at least as much as you're willing to be honest. And it also creates a deepening. And when you do that every day in a relationship, the relationship change. Because there's space to be able to be truthful and to know I care about you, even though this isn't my experience. I love to tell clients in my office, if I tell you right now, outside my door, the person you dislike or have the hardest time with in the world is outside, what goes on inside? And if I tell you that the person you love more than anybody else in the world is outside that door, what goes on inside? So what we think and believe then starts to create the reality of how we engage. If I'm fearful of you cheating on me and I start to become apprehensive and worried, which is what most of us do, to you, you're feeling like I have judged you and you've done something wrong. And it creates quite a problem. So there's that place of looking at, how do we work through where we struggle? How do we work through where we're fearful? To have it not create an even bigger challenge in assumption, in expectation, in a belief system. So there's a lot of trying to be as transparent with, this is my experience right now. This is what I'm asking of you. The other place that's been pivotal is, especially in couples work, but it fits for everything, to realize that if I ask you something instead of expecting, demanding, it's a very different experience. And we forget that and we move into demand or expectation. And if you have not said to me, yes, you will, then I'm falsely coming against you by believing you should. Because I'll ask people all the time, well, did the other person say that they would do that? I'm like, well, no. I'm like, well, then you've created a reality that the other person isn't necessarily aligned with. And I think that pivots off of living with my mom. We think the other person's going to believe and feel and think as we do. Well, you should know that. Well, anybody with common sense would do that. Well, everybody else does that. That's frustrating, but that isn't necessarily true, that just because everybody else does, the person you're with is going to. And so there's a place of, can I look at you for who you really are? And then from that, then start to make requests, to start to open up dialogue. It's a beautiful dance. And one thing I find with the word that you used earlier, resistance. So many people hate resistance. They hate change. And what I tell my clients is, oh, I hope I can tweak this to the other side. It's difficult. It's uncomfortable. But resistance is one of the best teachers, because what it says is something isn't lubricated, something isn't laid down correctly, something's in the way, it's not the right time. So if you ask yourself, well, what is it that I can bring in to make this safer for you? Why is it that you're fearful here? What can I do to help you in this fear? Then once again, compassion, connection, then it's easier to move. And I learned that when I was a young adult and I had a babysitter and came home that night and she said the kitchen drawer was broken. She didn't know how. So I asked the kids in the morning, they said, well, she shoved her hip against it until it closed. I thought, oh, we won't be having her as a babysitter again because she wasn't honest. But I asked the kids, do you want to see what was in the way? And it was a spoon, and it was, of course, bent, and the wood was charred or scarred. But what I said to them is, this is what resistance is. It's something stopping. Now, the outcome of it was unfortunate. But if the spoon had been found, what is in the way? What needs lubrication? What needs to be laid down right? What needs a little bit more security? I'm 61, and I've noticed that I will reach to hold a handrail now, which I never used to do. But my body is wanting a little bit more surety. That's what resistance is. That fear base of, I don't feel safe, I don't feel okay. Really important to empower that instead of put it down, shove it aside, diminish it. And so all of these things come from living with my mom. I learned that a yes is also a no. If I say yes to you, I'll be on your podcast, I have to say no to a client who wants to come. It's just a truth. It's always both. But when you can look at it being both, there's a way to embrace what the situation is for what it becomes. Yeah.
Dr. Heather, there's something that is kind of going through my mind as you're sharing. I mean, these are all just great wisdom. And, I think about the work that I've done. First of all, I love doing couples work. It's my favorite thing to do. It's so intense and dynamic. And I think that's just who I am, is intense and dynamic. And quite frankly, I'm in my own relationship. I've been, in a committed relationship for 24 years. And so as a human, having experience in relationship, I understand on a very human level. And, I think there's this great paradox about relationship and intimate, in particular, intimate relationship. There's this great paradox. And the great paradox is, you can struggle from these polarities of feeling like this is the greatest thing, and you feel loved and connected and safe, and you have these hopes of this romantic love, and that they're going to see you for who you are and all these things, and it can be the greatest arena for healing and transformation, right? And at the very exact time, the paradox is that it's the scariest, most threatening place that you're going to act out the most. And we all see it as couples therapists, like I'm thinking about, for example, right now, I'd been working with this couple for 10 years on and off, and they made the decision, to divorce because they could never get past this dynamic of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. They could never get past seeing each other through the eyes of, you are a threat to me, you're a perpetrator to me. And they couldn't get to the place of compassion. And I'm curious, you've had lots of experience with couples. I've had lots of experience with couples. And how do you help a couple when they get into a place of significant resistance because they don't feel safe and old stuff is being triggered and projected into the relationship? That's a big challenge. I know that's a big challenge. How do you manage that?
One of the first questions I will ask is, can you commit to saying to your partner that you will never intentionally wound or hurt their spirit?
Okay.
Not everyone can say yes. And it's a really important question, because if you can say yes, then I move into an exercise where I really ground that within them and say, so whenever you're feeling that's going on, that's not your partner's intention. And then there's going to be a conversation to talk about that. Like, I'm feeling that. I used to drive home from work sometimes and say, You know that Ted isn't wanting you to be upset. You know that he's not wanting you to be frustrated. You know he's not wanting you to feel unloved. Like he would want you to know he loves you dearly. Like, well, he's not doing a very good job on that. But then I could say, hey, I need to let you know something. I just didn't feel very loved. It moves it into an expressive situation. Now, when I have the couple that says, I can't promise that, then we have a deep exploration of, well, how does that act out? Is it safe for us to even be in therapy at this time? Because that needs to be assessed, of course, for risk. And then if they were to say something like, well, I know at times I just get really mad and really angry, then we will create situations for both people to be able to try to do everything that they can to keep themselves safe. And part of that is a safety word that I use, that if I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm getting uncomfortable or you're feeling overwhelmed, I have them share a word that they don't use regularly. Maybe it's tutti frutti. And when either says it, what it means is, I want to be able to stay in this conversation, but I'm overwhelmed. I can't. I want to get us back to a place of love, but I am incapable right now. And so then both people separate for about 5 minutes, get the emotions out. And then I ask them to explore, what is it that you were fearful of? Or where have you been hurt? Because those are the two places that I see we need to figure out, where do we go to? There's the place that's very important as we become adults, of letting yourself move into the place of, I will help myself be safe. You might be in a situation that's of risk. And so then what do you do to keep yourself safe? And it's important that you explore that, whether it's leaving, whether it is going to a shelter, whether it's simply saying, like, I'm not pursuing this conversation right now. It's very important that you give yourself a place to say, this is as far as I can go. And if you're with a partner who repeatedly challenges you in that and threatens that and won't respect that, then you've got some questions to make. There's some very important questions to ask yourself, like, can I stay in this, and is this really healthy? And that might then be some individual work. So knowing the resources that are available, finding out in what way, of course, that do they act out upon the other, that starts to open up lots of different very important things to do to try to help them keep themselves safe. Yeah.
You know, when
Most people will say, yes, I would never intentionally wound your spirit. And those are the couples that I work with the most, because then we've got the ability to do so. Yeah.
You know, when you do have the couple or a partner in a couplehood that says, I can't promise that, you know, I can't do that. What typically is at the bottom of that with the exploration? What do you find? Because I would imagine that people don't intentionally want to harm each other. So what do you usually find when somebody's unwilling to make that promise?
Someone who's been deeply hurt.
Okay.
And they feel that in having power over another, they're strong.
Okay.
If you help them see, I think you need to do a little bit of work with that person individually if you can, which is to explore, where does that come from? I have a gentleman I've been working with, and he was bullied horribly in junior high school, and it has deeply affected him his entire adult life. So he's come to me for his anger. And one day when we were sitting in session, we were working on it. I said, you're the middle school bully to yourself. And he just, and that was our moment. There's something to find, like finding what could help my mom feel safe. There's something to find. What's going on that you're feeling so threatened by me? What's going on that you would want to hurt me? Is that really what you want? Or is it that you really just want me to love you? So when someone comes to me with any kind of emotional state that's a strong, powerful one, that's not necessarily of love, I try as much as possible to say, gosh, you're so angry. Gosh, you're so upset. what is that? Because if I have curiosity for why it is you have this experience, then I can help with it, hopefully a little bit more, or at least lessen some of the fear that you have. But most of us don't do that. So
Right.
when someone comes to me and they're angry, they're mad, they're frustrated, they're judgmental, in the back of my head, what I say is, I haven't loved them very well, or they certainly need more love because they're not feeling loved right now. Now, am I feeling loved by what they're doing to me? No. But if I resist back and push back and get angry back, then I join them in their energetic state. I
Mhm.
don't want anyone to be angry with me or defensive with me or frustrated with me or scared with me. So I try to move into the place of, uh, oh my goodness, can you share with me where that comes from?
Mhm.
Here's the key. I let it be their truth.
Say more.
That's what my mom taught me. Her truth was different than mine.
Mhm.
But it is okay, though it might be hard for someone to have a different truth about you than you have. But I try to not negate it. I try to find out, well, where am I not loving you well? Or where am I not supporting you well? Or where am I not hearing you well? That's not an experience that I would like for you to have with me. It doesn't always mean that it's going to change. Sadly, you wish it would. Sometimes the person's still going to feel that way and respond that way. But if I know I have offered more, if I've offered to try to bless, if I've offered to try to care, I've done what I can do.
Mhm.
And then it's up to the other person if they're going to enter or not.
Mhm. Mhm. It's interesting to hear, I mean, again, these are really amazing words of wisdom. And as I'm translating or interpreting the things that you're sharing and taking them in, Dr. Heather, one of the things that I think about is, it seems, I think one of the things we lose sight of is that when people are, I'm going to put in air quotes, behaving badly, what we don't see, I think we have a tendency to either take it personally and defend. We feel threatened and then we act out. And this happens more in intimate relationships. And what we don't see is that typically at the core of somebody behaving badly is that they are either scared. They're either scared or they're feeling some form of threat.
Yes.
And if we can see that, like when you saw your, and again, we're kind of coming full circle, which is beautiful. You could see your mother was scared.
Yes.
You didn't judge her. You didn't make her wrong. You didn't make her bad. You just saw that she was scared. You could see that and you could respond from a place of love and compassion. And what I find with couples, a really big challenge for couples, especially when they're mutually triggering each other, is they can't see each other from that place of compassion and say, oh, you're scared or you're not feeling loved or safe right now. Do you have any surefire ways to kind of snap somebody out of that and help them see?
Well, so triggers are amazing
Mm-hmm.
because what they are is your experience of me right now is reminding you of something that you've gone through that's been really hard. So what I share with my clients is when you feel triggered, please own it. Own it and say, I'm feeling triggered right now. I need some space. I need some time to process. Let yourself remove yourself. Have it be agreed that the other person will allow that. Because what happens is we try to move into the trigger instead of figuring out why is the trigger coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that space, ask yourself, what is this reminding you of? Once again, what are you fearful of? Where are you hurt? And how is that playing out in this comment you just heard from your partner? And then come back and say, so this reminds me of something that happened with my mom, where I felt like I was judged. I'm not sure what your intention was right there, but I went into that place. Can you share with me what your intention was? And then that helps you see that there could be a little bit of a different experience than just what you felt. Triggers are such a sacred moment where if we can help ourselves heal in the moment to, I'm not necessarily going through what I'm fearful of going through. This moment could be different, but safety, security is absolutely pivotal to bring into that moment.
Yes.
The other person doesn't heal you, but the other person can support you in a beautiful way to help yourself heal to a place of, oh my goodness, for the first time in my life, this isn't the reality. This is a different possibility. My husband used to say to me when we'd come to a place of challenge, could there be any other possibility than what you think it is? Like, of course. Okay. Okay. It didn't mean that it was.
Right.
But if you use triggers as a way to help yourself find what it is that within yourself is wanting to heal, that moment came up because that part of you is wanting to heal. I'm no longer threatened the way I was threatened when I was 8. How do I stay adult me now? When we go into trigger, we go into child.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why I tell people, please give yourself a little bit of time, hug yourself, hold yourself, help yourself feel safe. Because as long as I'm feeling that you're trying to hurt me, I'm in a defensive mode and I'm not going to see who you really are. And I'm not able to protect myself. So it's very important that you go and protect yourself first before you step back in.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Heather, thank you so much for sharing your story and your words. You've shared so many words of wisdom. I think this is just rich with information. I really appreciate you sharing so just generously.
Oh,
And you know, before, and I know we've got to bring it to an end here. I'd love to continue to having this conversation, believe me. But before we wrap up, how can listeners connect with you? How can they find you?
the easiest place is my website. So it's drheatherbrowne.com, www.drheatherbrowne.com. And you'll see my TEDx on there. You'll see my book. You'll see working with me. I have a whole page of freebies. I'd love to hear from listeners, even if you just want to reach out and say, hey, I liked what you said, or I didn't understand what you said. Could you clarify it more? I'm always very grateful to hear back from people who have been curious about what we've said. And I just want to thank you. What an honor it is to be chosen to be a guest on your podcast. So
thank you, Dr. Heather.
for giving me the time. You are delightful and so sharp and exciting to speak with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heather. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from the discussion. And if you'd like to work with me, please contact me through my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. And until the next time, stay empowered and take good care of yourself. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Thank you, Dr. Heather. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.